In this video, we will be installing a new ACT twin disc clutch kit with the included flywheel. While this video provides the basics on how to switch out a clutch, it is no way intended to replace a factory service manual. As with all our videos, we'll start by disconnecting the negative terminal from the battery. For this vehicle, it's located in the trunk on the passenger side behind the access cover. At the front of the exhaust, unplug the electrical connections for the O2 sensors, both before and after the catalytic converters. Now at the rear of the vehicle, unplug the electrical connections at the diverter valves. For better accessibility, you may want to loosen or remove the splash guards. Double check to make sure all the electrical connections for the exhaust system have been disconnected. On the driver's side, loosen the clamp located just after the catalytic converter and then unbolt the 4-bolt flange in front of the catalytic converter. Unbolt and remove the catalytic converter brace bracket. Unfasten and remove the chassis brace at the center of the vehicle. On the passenger side, unbolt the 4-bolt flange in front of the catalytic converter and also the 2-bolt flange behind the catalytic converter. At the rear of the vehicle, unbolt the hanger brackets on each side located just above the tips. Detach the rubber isolators from the hangers and then remove the entire exhaust system. Mark the drive shaft and yoke assembly at the front and rear. Remove the tunnel brace towards the rear of the vehicle. Unbolt the heat shield and then disengage the differential cooler lines from the brackets. This will now give you some room to remove the heat shield. Unfasten the front and rear of the drive shaft, leaving the hardware in place for now. Loosen the hardware at the center of the drive shaft. Now remove the hardware at the front and rear and then finally the center, then remove the drive shaft from under the vehicle. Unclip the differential cooler line connections at the rear of the transmission. Separate the connections and cap or plug each end to prevent oil from draining out. We used rubber vacuum caps for this task. Place the cooler lines to the side and out of the way. We attach them to our hoist using cable ties. Disconnect all the electrical connections on the transmission and unbolt the cooler line brackets at the lower rear of the transmission. At this point, we also supported the rear of the transmission and unbolted the cross member, then dropped the transmission down just a few inches to give us better access to the top. We then disengaged the entire harness and moved it out of the way. Unbolt the transmission cooler line bracket from the right engine mount. Unclip the transmission cooler line connection on the right side of the transmission. Separate the connection and cap or plug each end to prevent oil from draining out. Again, we used rubber vacuum caps for this task. Remove the top bell housing bolts. Above the rear of the transmission, unclip and remove the pin from the shifter rod. Now remove the pins from the shifter bracket. These pins have a spring-loaded mechanism which must be depressed in order to get them out. We did this by pulling the pins out as far as they can go and then using a small flat blade screwdriver, press the mechanism in, which then allowed us to completely pull the pins out. Unclip and remove the hydraulic line from the clutch slave cylinder. Now lift the transmission back into place and install 2 bolts back into the crossmember. Remove the splash guard at the front of the vehicle, followed by the left and right. Remove the front cradle shear plate. Support the front cradle with an adjustable jack. Loosen the front cradle bolts 1 turn. The middle cradle bolts 5 turns. And completely remove the rear cradle bolts. Place a jack under the transmission and remove the crossmember bolts. Lower the transmission until the front cradle tilts down approximately 1 inch from the vehicle. Remove the remaining bell housing bolts and separate the transmission from the vehicle. Lower the transmission and remove it from under the vehicle. With the transmission now removed, we can remove the old pressure plate, disc, and flywheel. Before installing a new clutch, we recommend that the pilot bearing be replaced with a new one. Install the flywheel onto the engine using new OE flywheel attachment bolts. Torque the bolts to 74 foot-pounds in a star pattern. Make sure to clean off the friction surface area with a non-petroleum based cleaner. Install the bottom disc and hold it in place with the alignment tool. Before installing the floater, be sure to clean both sides with a non-petroleum based cleaner. Now install the floater, making sure the balance marks line up with the flywheel and torque the hardware to 24 foot-pounds. Now remove the alignment tool, install the top disc, and reinsert the alignment tool to hold both discs in place. Before installing the pressure plate, be sure to clean the friction surface with a non-petroleum based cleaner. Install the pressure plate, making sure that the balance marks line up with the flywheel and floater, and then tighten the pressure plate nuts gradually and uniformly in a star pattern until the pressure plate is bottomed out against the pressure plate shims. Torque the pressure plate nuts to 50 foot-pounds. Remove the alignment tool from the assembly. Unbolt and remove the slave cylinder from the transmission. Anytime a clutch is replaced, we recommend that a new slave cylinder be installed. Install the spacer and reinstall the slave cylinder. Tighten the bolts to 10 foot-pounds. Lightly coat the input shaft splines with the purple Ceram lube included with the clutch kit. Wipe off any excess lube to prevent any contamination of the clutch discs. Lift the transmission back into place and install 2 bell housing bolts on the sides. Install the hydraulic line onto the slave cylinder. At this point, bleed the hydraulic system until a steady flow of fluid comes out each time the bleeder valve is opened. When complete, make sure to fill the fluid reservoir up to the max marking. Install all the remaining bell housing bolts and tighten them to 37 foot-pounds. Lift the transmission completely into place, then reinstall and tighten all the cradle bolts. Torque the bolts to 74 foot-pounds. Refit the pin for the shifter rod and insert the retaining clip. Reinstall the electrical harness onto the transmission, making sure to replace any cable ties that may have been cut. Reconnect all the electrical connections. As with our vehicle, this was a perfect time to install a skip shift eliminator, which was supplied to us by the vehicle owner. Reinstall the transmission cooler line connection on the right side of the transmission, making sure to secure it with the retaining clip. Fasten the transmission cooler line bracket back onto the right engine mount. Reinstall and tighten the bolts for the transmission cooler line brackets on each side of the transmission. Now reinstall the pins for the shifter bracket. Reinstall the cross member to the vehicle's body and torque the hardware to 43 foot-pounds. Reinstall the drive shaft, making sure to align the marks made during the disassembly. Tighten the hardware at the front and rear to 67 foot-pounds and tighten the hardware at the center to 16 foot-pounds. Reinstall the heat shield and tunnel brace towards the rear of the vehicle. Tighten the tunnel brace hardware. Place the cooler lines back into their brackets and reinstall and tighten the heat shield hardware. Reconnect the cooler lines at the rear of the transmission and be sure to secure the connections with the retaining clips. Place the front cradle shear plate back into position. Install and tighten all the hardware. Reinstall the splash guards on the left, right, and the front. Reinstall the exhaust system, making sure to place all the rubber isolators into the hangers. At the rear of the exhaust, just above the tips, mount the hanger bracket assemblies back into position. Now reconnect the electrical connections located on each side of the flapper valves. If you remove the splash guards, place them back into position and tighten the hardware. At this point, reinstall the hardware for all the flanges, clamps, and brackets. Leave them all loose for now. Reinstall the catalytic converter brace bracket and leave the hardware hand tight. Reconnect all the electrical connectors for the exhaust system that have been disconnected. Now tighten the hardware for all the flanges, clamps, and brackets. Reinstall the chassis brace at the center of the vehicle and tighten the hardware. Finally, reconnect the negative terminal to the battery and reinstall the access cover. For more information on our products or the parts featured in this video, please visit our website in the description below. If you found this video helpful, please support us by liking this video and subscribing to our channel. Thank you for watching.